Hey, good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Financial Literacy Week powered by U Mortgage. It has been a great day on our fourth day so far. A lot of great sessions this week. We had three sessions happen this morning. I see some repeat names here that joined in on those sessions, so it's great to see you again. We're fortunate to host our last session of Thursday with Chris Griffith. He is from Debt Does Deals. And he's going to talk about debt, even though we've had a debt course earlier today, but a little bit of a different perspective towards debt. So we're very fortunate to have him here, and welcome to our Financial Literacy Week. So, Chris, I'll let you take over. Thank you for being here.
Awesome, Ryan. Thanks for the introduction. What's happening, y'all? As Ryan said, my name is Christopher Griffith, and if you don't know who I am, I'm a nobody. I'm from North Texas, a tiny little town called Pottsboro. I was born and raised here, traveled several different places while I spent some time in the military, learned some different things through the process, and now I am right smack in the middle of the neighborhood that I grew up in. My house is 1,500 foot that way that I left when we graduated. I think the biggest thing that I hope to accomplish and who I want to speak to today is I want to accomplish. I want you to think about things. I want you to challenge maybe some thought processes that you've had, some things that people have told you that were accurate, some just belief systems. I want to share a story with you, my story on kind of how I arrived at the statement of debt does deals, like cheeky title, right? I'm bold with debt because my story, I don't know who I'm speaking to. I can't see y'all here. I don't know your backgrounds, but my story was, I would say, lower income family to a blue collar laborer. A mom that took care of us great, lots of love in the house, didn't have a ton of money, but that wasn't a real big deal, right? My dad's a home builder. He's a framer of homes with a business partner of his, and they've been doing that now for 35 years. They're great at it, right? And as I watched my dad growing up, I realized very quickly that everything should be working. My dad's a workaholic, and I picked that up from him. You know, he's working, my mom's working, kids are working, doing different things around the house, chores, right? And the money and equity should be working too. One thing that changed with his dad in our family tree was home ownership. There were very small, modest homes right down the road that were purchased, and through a progression for them, they achieved a very good footing as homeowners in America. And that may not sound like a big significant thing now if you have never purchased a house, or if you're a student now kind of wondering, is it worth the risk? Right? I hear that I have to be slave to somebody, like all of these things. What I'll tell you, for me, after after I got out of the military, traveling around for about 15 years, I landed in Colorado. And for my family, which was a wife and two daughters at the time, we have three daughters now, so take a little pity on me. But at the time, we had two daughters, and we had to decide to rent or to buy. And we were in a market in just south of Denver, a rural market, to where we were seeing lots of different properties for sale. It was moving very, very quickly, so somewhat similar to this, but there were a lot of supply. We used at that point a VA loan, which we had access to because of the military, and it's significant in this discussion because it's 100% debt, right? Their money was the significant factor in that, right? But we used that VA loan at the point to buy a home, a short sale of all things, right? With money and awesome credit and all of these things not being the gatekeeper to my access to this opportunity. So why is that significant? Well, one house changed our life financially. Like, that's a true statement. We purchased this place, a short sale with woodpecker holes in it and everything. And I mean, it's like that movie. It's not Cheaper by the Dozen. That's a different one. It was about the house. They're really renovating. There's a bunch of kids. Anyway, if you know what movie I'm talking about, drop the title in the comments because I feel like a little goofy now. But it was an opportunity. We looked around and we defined a process of identifying a market, right? A location within the market, an acquisition price that we wanted to target on, value opportunities through rehab, and when we might be able to sell or realize a gain. And so it was somewhat weighed and measured, but the access to that, we didn't have a ton of money. I was just beginning a new career and trying to understand how mortgages work, right? It was the fact that we could access the opportunity to borrow or buy money, right? Well, everyone's afraid of debt because, well, the money pit. Thanks, Nathan. But everyone's afraid of debt because they believe things like the borrower's slave to the lender, right? Or paying interest is a bad thing. Like, if you don't have a lot of money, if you don't come from pedigree and your story is similar to mine, you're going to need debt on your side, because debt, whether you use it in a good, healthy way that brings you forward, or if it's the first thing you run into because you don't have much, debt is as significant as money is in your story. And I think that that is underlined by the significance of your credit score, right? Your historical interaction with debt and how you've behaved with it and your fundamental understanding of it. So if you're at this point of the conversation, you're wondering, okay, well, what are we talking about? Well, here's what we're talking about. Money and debt are both currency. Both of them have purchasing power. Both of them have cost. Both of them have risk, right? If you think you know what some of the costs are to money, drop them in the comments. But as you're seeing right now, especially with inflation, inflation is a significant cost to holding money as an asset, right? Just in the same way that interest may be on debt. Opportunity cost, the ability to play offense. If I didn't have a lot, when we finally got a little bit, we needed that little bit to cellulite grow exponentially as quick as we could. Albert Einstein didn't say amortized interest is the eighth wonder of the world. He didn't insinuate that a strong defense would win championships. He said compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. And the significance of that is once you begin to compound your values and they're compounded regularly, that can create significant change and growth, right? And so for me, not having money, I had to learn, okay, well, what is this debt? How does it work? Dave Ramsey says it's terrible. Like, what's he talking about, right? And he says, well, the borrower slave to the lender. Like, well, I started to think through that and like, is that really true? Like all of you that are on here now have lived through 2008, more than likely. If you're younger than that on here, impressive. My poor kids, you might also have that issue if your family's in the business, maybe. But the borrower's slave to the lender, really? Like, because I don't understand that. Because the borrower can be late and they can catch up. They can be late and catch up, and they can do that over and over again and not lose the value that they contractually agreed to for the cost that they're carrying, right? Um, they can decide to rent a house out if they can't afford the payments. They can refinance a property. They can sell a home and wrap it with a private note. They can seek a loan modification from the servicer or from the government. They can have their principals reduced, their terms changed, their interest rates changed. There are forbearance opportunities now when the market has major things going on with it. They can short sell a house, deed in lieu. There's foreclosure protection or prevention funds out there. There's lots of different affordable modification programs. They can do things like master lease a property to an investor that's going to sell it as a lease option or rent it out or something. Like they can file a Chapter 13 bankruptcy and still maintain the shelter that they've purchased with their agreement. They can do shared ownership with investors. And if they're of age, they can do an HECM reverse mortgage. But the point being, the borrower in many different ways cannot completely fulfill their obligation and still make good on their obligation. And this is an important thing because the lenders even realized in 2008 that through foreclosing and taking back a house, that the costs they incur impact their profitability, which is what businesses are about, right? And the time value of money in a way that it might not be best to foreclose. And so you have all of these different ways and correct and get back to good standing to maintain the shelter that they're purchasing. Look, whether you're buying a house for you or buying another house for a guy like me that owns investment properties and rentals, you're buying the house, right? You're afraid of paying a little interest while failing to recognize that rent's 100% interest. You don't get any of the long-term values when you're renting. I saw a deal today. It said you get your freedom. Well, you can also go take a tent and move around on public land in the national forest in Colorado every 14 days because you can't stay camped out. It's a dumb rule, but every 14 days. And you can have ultimate freedom. No one talking to you, telling you what to do. Like, but what are your opportunities? So for the sake of paying interest, people don't understand that they're going to have the same cost. Like you're going to have shelter, right? So who are you paying interest to? What's it doing for you? What's it gaining for you? If you follow the data, the biggest thing that changes a family's wealth status that's never had wealth before, the first most likely thing is a single family home. It's their residence. When they buy a home, if they can buy and maintain ownership over time, the data proves that that's one of the most significant growth features that most families, especially those that start with little, have to access to change their status. I grew up and I mean, I remember it wasn't we're like super poor, like woe is me, like hold all that stuff in your pockets. Like we didn't have a lot, but we had friends, we had relationships. And so I got to go out and do other things with people. And very incrementally, we grew to where we have a little bit more. But Uh, Maybe there's a couple people on this video that know me from back then and they can kind of attest to it, but it's not like we were lacking or missing out, but I could tell very differently when my dad's building homes that are 13, 15, 20,000 square foot log cabins. And we live in a respectable 1,300, 1,400 square foot house that's constantly in a stage of remodel because that's what you get with a frame, right? But it was like, I remember asking my dad one day, I'm like, hey, Dad, I got this great idea. Why don't you just build that house, but for us? You're the one doing it. And that's when I realized that there was an issue, right? There was a fundamental failure to access the thing that could make that happen, even if he possessed all of the skills to do it, right? And so dad always told me growing up, you can do anything you put your mind to, all of those types of things. But there are some things in life that you can't do. I can't be a left tackle in the NFL. I'm 6 foot tall, maybe an eighth under that, and about 155 pounds. I can't be a left tackle in the NFL. It's not that you can't do anything. It's just some things are unreasonable. They're not going to happen that way for you. Like even if I put on weight, right? And what I realized was, unless I was looking at what it took to grow, if I looked at what I had to start with, that I would never be able to accomplish much, at least not moving along. And so for us in that first home, when we were able to purchase it, it was with a story that didn't have really anything to do with money. They opened the door to an opportunity because of a debt product that was available that allowed me to purchase a sum of money to buy a house that I owned, that I took title to, right? Even if there's a lien against it, right? Rentals have cost, buying has cost, and there are other costs that go into buying. We had a plan to rehab to create value. It was a really cool story. Like we purchased the short sale for 332,000, which if that sounds like a lot to you, oh my goodness, for my family at the time, it was like I felt like a dunce spending that much money on a house. Like it was the most, like it was ridiculous. It was a lot. But in that market, it was not, right? We bought it, we rehabbed it over 5 years, and then we sold that house for $810,000. One house changed our life. And that sounds like, okay, well, that sounds like a big dumb story, Christopher. Maybe you had success, in one, but is it reasonable for us, right? How hard you believe in a thing and place your opportunity bet matters. I'm doing it again with a home that I'm in now. It's doubled in value. I think a lot of the home buyers out there have seen significant increase just across the board, but some of them have seen even larger increase because of how they approach the market that they're in, whether or not it's growing, what type of asset they're buying. Are they creating opportunity to increase value with their efforts so that every dollar they spend might be worth two more? Right? And how are they capitalizing on that with capital gains? If you're a married couple, you get a 250 exemption on cap gains, $500,000. Like, what else do you get to do to make $500,000 tax free? Can someone post that in the comments over here? Because tax is something that definitely pulls away from your ability to take this thing and compound it, right? And so my story only grew because of 100% loan to value mortgage at the time. And I had income. We were making better money at the time and we were growing. It turned out sure better than we thought it might because we worked really hard. But I think as often as people are afraid of the future, their biggest failures is they're underestimating themselves and they're not betting on themselves. And they're afraid and they think that they're a slave to somebody if they do this thing. And lack of doing something is oftentimes more dangerous and more damaging to their future pursuits as doing something and failing and making a bad choice, right? Like just because you fail at something doesn't mean that you won't have another opportunity to succeed. But if you never try, you never try. So with that, if you can think about it a little bit differently and see that a lender, you know what happens? All those things I walked y'all through earlier, you know what the lender does that's servicing that loan on the other side? Do you know how many different ways they can get out of their obligation to you? Very few. Who's slave to who? It sounds like a partnership to me with understanding and opportunity and something that they prefer and the consumers prefer to work agreeably towards. And even the government attempts to make sure that people stay in houses. For the VA loan, and I like to talk about VA loans just because I'm a vet. Well, one of the things that people don't realize about the VA loan is the VA works just as hard to keep veterans in houses as they do to get them in houses. They can acquire loans that aren't performing well and service them and modify them. And they've been doing that long before forbearance and these other topics came up. And the point of saying all of this isn't to relinquish the responsibility that you're taking when you create an obligation or a debt, right? It's not so that you can be flexible and take advantage of certain things. It's not that either. The point of it is that you have flexibility to achieve the value that you're looking for, even if you're failing a little bit along the way, right? And if you're renting, you know what happens if you aren't making your payments? You think that you have as much flexibility to cover the cost of your shelter if you don't make a payment for 30 days? Not in all states. In some states, maybe, but you don't get any of the long term value out of it. When you consider what houses are appreciating for, what inflation's looking like, what it costs for a new investor to buy a house that maybe was occupied before and turn it into something that you can rent, the impact that this inflation and that the inventory shortage and the growth that it's in the market now, it's only going to drive up rent costs. So the point that for all of you that watch this that don't that don't own a home right now, the point I want you to really focus in on is you can buy you a house, or you can buy like a guy like me another house. But either way, you're buying the house. So you might as well own it. You might as well get to enjoy the shelter, paint the walls and break some walls down and redo things. Shelter in a house may be one of the best financial investments that you'll ever make in your life. But as far as the value to a family, as guys and gals, I spent let's say 8 years in the military. Well, bouncing around, deployments, missing a kid's first birth, like we were moving, we were mobile, things were changing, and we never really had a place where we could grow, right? The thing that allowed us the first opportunity to have chickens, do all those things, like that house, we'll never forget that home. It was a home. It was a place where we got to grow differently as a family, and it changed our prospects financially and had nothing to do with the money that was in my pocket. It had everything to do with the opportunity and access that debt thought through well and applied well could create growth and create wealth. And it's something that we've seen in a lot of the professionals that see all of the time. You see incredible stories of growth where consumers are using different debt instruments or mortgages to buy things that otherwise they would never have been able to buy, right? And so that's the cool part about it. It's not the value that you have to bring to something ultimately, typically, that determines what your opportunity is. It's how strong your obligation is to the community with the value that you're trying to create. Debt is obligation. If you obligate yourself properly, that can be something that will drive you forward and grow what you're able to be doing. But there's not some good or bad claim. Like good and bad are words reserved for humans. Like not even dogs. Dogs aren't good and bad. Dogs are dogs. This phone's not good or bad. It's a phone. Debt isn't good or bad. It just is. It's like fire. It cook you a steak. It can warm you in the winter. It can burn your house down. What it accomplishes and what we attribute or refer to that as being good or bad is different for all of you, right? And so if you're using debt in a way that allows you to healthily, like in a healthy manner, grow forward, if you can use it in a way to avert risk so that the values you can compound are liquid, you can access them to maintain some of your debt while at the same time growing, what's the harm? Both money and debt are currencies with buying power, cost, and risk, right? You can lose a dollar. You ain't going to lose a dollar out of your mortgage more than likely. There's some questions that popped in here. How do I
Yeah,
get confident? Oh, yeah. Sorry. Go ahead. You want to read them?
you caught it perfectly. I was going to say there's a couple questions that popped up. I'll let you take them.
Awesome. Nathan asks here. Nathan's my business partner in Veta VA, just so you know. So this is a don't feel like I'm pretending I don't know him. How do I get confident on the amount of debt needed for the risk? What if I can't cover the cost? Well, you never want to over obligate yourself, whether it's going to your mom's for dinner and you foreclose and you or fail to pay that and don't show up, or whether it's a mortgage and you take on too much of a housing payment that you can't afford. You want to consider the risk that the cash flow hit that what you're going to take is going to have on your ability to maintain that thing. For me personally, I like to have a large liquid reserve. So cash is trash, just to put that out there. Liquidity can compound while it also can act as a purchasing vehicle or a finance vehicle, right? So I make sure I have liquidity, which is not just money in a bank. If you have $100,000 in the bank right now, you're watching it lose value daily. Unless you're in the SRP stuff in the military, but they only do that 10 grand, 10%. If you're a vet, check it out, or active duty rather. But if your money's in the bank right now, it's losing tremendous value through inflation. So get confident with maintaining debt by understanding the natural cost that you're going to have associated with that thing, regardless. Look at it as a cost equation and do something like a buy versus rent analysis and see when it makes more sense to rent versus buy, and how long, if you buy, does it take to recoup the value spent for things like down payment and those types of items. And then make certain that you have a way so that when you have an interruption in cash flow or an unexpected medical event, or you have a kid, those things are expensive. But when you have changes to your cash flow, you're already prepared and you have a temporary, Dave Ramsey likes to say, have an emergency cash fund. Don't keep cash in envelopes in your house. That's a really probably not a great thing. Cash is very easy to lose, for the record. That is a viable risk for cash. But use those sums of liquidity so that you know you have some staying power, because even if you have to walk away from this one and reassess and buy something different or change markets, you want to give yourself opportunity to react to change, right? Or you want to give yourself opportunity to store some that's going to compound and grow, that's liquid. And so at some point, 5 years later down the road, after you've sold a house or two, 10 years later down the road, house or two, you've got this big chunk of liquidity that's growing, that's compounding, right? And then you know for sure, like, well, at least right here, I know we've got 2 years worth of mortgage payments. So if everything goes to crazyville, we'll wait a year while everyone freaks out, and then we'll make a decision about what we need to do, not rushed, not hurried, but giving ourselves a time to decide, right? So I think that's the most comfortable, or the best way to get comfortable with debt, is understanding that you're going to have the cost either way. You're buying a house for somebody, right? And it's not like you can be more late or have less risk with rent either. Another question here: say I own a home, what does the path look like towards a second home rental if I don't have the money for a down payment or closing costs? I think one of the like really good ways, especially for people that bought starter homes or are in areas that are really populated, they're looking to move out of now. As you grow, typically for a while the houses get bigger, your needs get bigger, right? And so if you don't have the money necessarily to say, okay, I want to go out and buy an investment property with 20% down, 25% down, right? I see a lot of people have success by simply, okay, we've been here for 4 years. This has been a great home. Let's go find a new one. And then they use a mortgage program that doesn't require the same higher down payment necessary when you're buying an investment property or a second home. And they occupy the new home. And so they're vacating the old home. Doesn't mean they have to sell it. You're going to have to qualify, but vacating the house, they may be able to use a portion of the rental income that would be earnable on that, identified in the appraisal and a few other approaches, to offset those mortgage costs, right? Now they have to go through the process of being a manager of property, of making sure everything, capital expenditures, at that point, they know what a house costs with maintenance and other things that you have to keep up, right? But they want to make certain that when they make that transition, right, that they have the liquidity needed to maintain that asset well too. But I think as far as owning a home and how do I become a landlord or a person who's buying real estate, I think one of the most finesse fills ways that I've seen it done are just simply vacating the old home, converting it to a rental, and buying something new and growing. And that's usually a good thing. I think it is a good thing when people are buying and selling houses. If you don't have that, you have markets like we have now where inventory is incredibly low. Like the biggest risk isn't mortgage interest rates going up. If you're out there and you're like, oh my God, the costs, I hear the interest rates are moving up 4 or 5 or whatever, the biggest fear isn't that interest rates are going to rise. The biggest fear is that inventory isn't going to increase, because if that doesn't happen, you're going to have a lot of competitiveness on the houses, and that's going to drive up costs. Ever been to an auction, right? But you have more buyers than you have on the property. So I think that don't be afraid of the cost associated with debt for opportunity. Be afraid of not encountering opportunity. There's a person who grew up with a little lot. I'll tell you, opportunity is worth everything. Like, and that's ultimately what mortgages provide, statistically, data analysis, all of the programs and housing programs that out there that are trying to find families that have never purchased before so that they can have access and opportunity to buy something. They have that desire for a reason. That's because data shows the fastest way that people who've never had a lot achieve some. And the first most common way is through home ownership. I think most of retirees' assets are found in their equity in their homes as well. And so it's a good thing, I think, but hopefully that'll answer that question. I don't see any other questions popping up. Covered just about everything, I believe, at least. And I hope maybe I've challenged your paradigm on, is debt good or bad? Well, is your phone good or bad? Is this hat good or bad? I think it's a good hat. I'm just saying, but it all depends on what it does, how it works in your life, how it creates value for you, opportunity, growth opportunity, right? So don't be afraid of some cost. Don't force all of your values into playing defense your whole life. defense doesn't win championships unless it's getting pick sixes. It's like doing offensive things in nature too, right? So compounding is the area that you need to focus on and try to do it in a safe way. One more question. What might be an example of leveraging debt outside of home ownership that I could use to create opportunity? Who debt outside of home ownership. So like land or like business or like can a credit card be a good thing? Like I have a credit card, we use it for everything that we possibly can, and then we pay it off with cash before the statement balance is due so that we have free money basically for 25, 30 days and we get points and other values for it. So that credit card is actually a functional thing that gives me cash back, significant chunks of it. And we may pay a little cost here and there, but for the most part, we use it as an easier, safer mechanism for payment because we get compounded value. As far as other things like land, I was a framer's son. I wanted to be a farmer's son, man. I wanted to have cows. I wanted to have horses and places to hunt and do all of those things, as my beard might stereotypically suggest. But we didn't have the money to be landowners, right? Like landowners, like, come on. Well, at this point in our lives, my brother-in-law and his dad, we've gone out and we've purchased 800 acres of land in Oklahoma, right? And the land's already appreciated a lot. And that loan product was really cool. We actually didn't have to have any money down for it either. One of the partners had some free clear land, so they collateralized. They put a note on some portion of value on that land, and they do a 20-year note, 20-year loan on the raw land with basically no money out of pocket because we had a cross collateralization at a really aggressive interest rate, just as aggressive as some of the home rates that you're seeing right now. And so, from a cost perspective, that's how you get to where you can own 800 acres, I guess, put cows on without having a whole big hit out of your pocket. And so there's some stuff that builds into that, but in accessing land, the SBA right now, small businesses are a great thing. And I want to say that and point that out to you in here. And if you have a small business and if you're an entrepreneur, don't be afraid that you're not going to be able to access competitive mortgages out there. If that's what you want to do instead of going to college and get a big W-2 job, there are all sorts of debt, more instruments out there that are very effective and useful. But for the SBA specifically, the Small Business Administration, they offer debt to small businesses and really long-term rates. And so how can that help a business? Well, it can give them an operating reserve. It can give them the funds needed to make some hires, to build some training, to redesign their consumer-facing profile, right? To build a better business engine that serves the community they're in, that serves the tax base, that serves the person that's building it, right? And you can use debt to help accomplish some of those things. So thanks again. I've been thinking of ways I can make more than just my job and gaining value in the home that I bought. I think for a lot of you homeowners out there, or people looking at new homes, especially if you're younger, don't be afraid of work. Don't be afraid of some of these older houses. Our house had woodpecker holes in it, was missing big chunks of things out of it, had some foundation issues, needed everything updated. And all I could do was look at that thing and go, oh my God, honey, this house, uh-huh. Like, because all of the houses around it, the area that it was in, all of them would appreciate every dollar that I put into it by at least a factor of two because there was a lot of opportunity there. It was below the normal standard of kind of what was there. So look around and find those opportunities, learn some different trades, enjoy kind of the process. But margin and creating sweat equity in housing is, I think, one of the greatest ways for people to great. Like I did the math on it, 332 to 810, if treated as like a 40-hour a work week job and called a side hustle, which was home ownership, reducing about 100 grand, which would be like a tax consideration that we'd put into the thing in cash and borrowing in different ways as we went. That house on a gross number as a side hustle was worth $45 and something cents an hour for a full-time side hustle when you broke down the gross change in value, right? And everyone's like, well, 20% of that, but you spent that out of pocket. And I'm like, yeah, well, guess what tax bracket I'm in? So it's effectively the same thing, the money that we spent or had to spend to get to it. But as far as a valuable side hustle for us, that was huge, right? And it's the case with our second home. And I see it for the case for as the case for a lot of people out there that see the opportunity in front of them, that consider all of the things that they need to know about their choices, obligate themselves to something they decide on, and then push forward and growing. Don't be afraid to grow, even if you think that you may make some mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. And don't be afraid of things being good or bad when they're inanimate. This is not a good or bad phone. It's actually it is. It's an Apple product, and if you're an Android person, you have a bad phone. Said every group text message everywhere. So I'm kidding on that. No good and bad. They're just things, and what you accomplish with them, and the values they create for you and your family is a thing then that can be called good or bad based on your perspective. So define your goals, look around you for opportunity. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot them over to you mortgage. They're a great resource for answering things. I can help you out if you have questions on what on the earth I'm talking about. If you watch this thing and you have a question, the one thing I want you to know is there's no way on earth that I want to work with you in any capacity, or I'm going to for that matter. I want people to consider a different paradigm, because I think if they don't, they're going to do things like I've seen retirees do, and that's retire with a good sum of money, pay off the house, protect everything, most conservative, don't spend money. And then they're going to live to a point, and I've seen this in my family, live to the point to where the sum of money saved is no longer even significant, and they're afraid of outliving what they've created. And for the ones that I've known there, at the very least, they had a house that had grown exceptionally more in value than the sum of money that they'd saved for retirement. Saving isn't a way to wealth, right? Saving is not a way to wealth. Investing and compounding and change is. So thank you all for those that followed along today. I'll certainly look forward to chatting if we find an opportunity to, and make healthy choices with debt. It's currency.
Yeah, Chris, thank you for joining us here today. Is there totally willing and up to you? Is there any way, if anyone wants to connect with you, any places to follow you, channels that you can connect with?
I'm on Facebook way too much. If you're on Facebook or LinkedIn or any of the other social places, I'm on there, Christopher Griffith. You can reach out. I don't really do the email, the phone number thing. But if you're on social, if they shoot a question over to you, I'm happy to answer questions. You can follow along. I do some different stuff, even on Instagram, some different podcasts where I talk about the how and the what, a little bit more specifics. Today, like, man, Anastasia earlier on here with the debt conversation, the charts and stuff, I saw her video and I was like, oh, great. I don't have to do any of that. So there are a lot of different ways to consume the information out there. I just appreciate the opportunity to talk about it, hopefully in a way that makes them think.
Yeah, I love that. So thanks so much for joining us. It truly has been a pleasure to have you. Thank you to all our attendees who came in and joined this session as well. Like Chris said, if you have any other questions, you can relay them to us. You have our contact information. We can relay them on to Chris. You can look for his social channels. But again, thank you, Chris. Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening. And we have a bunch more sessions coming up tomorrow. Actually, home-related topics is the theme of our day tomorrow. So we're really excited to have that. We'll be kicking off at 11 a.m. tomorrow, and we hope to see you then. But have a good evening, everyone, and take care.